Welcome to this exclusive conversation with Yadi Narayana, Field CTO Asia Pacific at Datadog. This is Bhashwati Guhamajumdar, Associate Editor at APAC Media and CXO Media. Today's discussion will focus on the rising cyber risks facing Indian enterprises, the concerns flagged by the World Economic Forum, and how organizations can balance rapid digital innovations with stronger security and resilience in an AI driven environment. Thank you, Mr. Narayana. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so straight we'll start with our first question for this exclusive interview. The World Economic Forum flags cybersecurity as an top near-term risk for India. For what you see on the ground and where the Indian enterprises most exposed today, cloud infrastructure, applications, and data, and others. If you can explain it a bit.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a really an important topic. And honestly, it aligns with what we are seeing every day on the ground. So if I look across the Indian enterprises right now, the exposure is not confined to just one layer, like, say, cloud or apps. It's more systemic. It's the speed of that digital transformation, which is outpacing the maturity of security controls, what we have in place. Now, India is digitizing at incredibly fast pace, right? We see the cloud adoption, we've seen mobile first platforms, we've seen fintech ecosystems being built, we have seen so many AI integrations getting developed. Now it's all accelerating, but that speed comes with the complexity. So if I break it down into very basic terms here, the first is the cloud infra. That's a huge one. Now, organizations have moved rapidly into this cloud, multi cloud environments, but in several cases, the governance has not scaled at the same pace. We still see misconfigurations, overly permissive,
Yeah.
identity kept open, the access management, exposing storage, so things like that. So in the cloud, a small configuration error can have a very large impact. Now, the second is the apps and APIs. Now, Indian enterprises are building, these modern distributed systems using an array of technologies. Now, that's innovation, but every API endpoint is a potential attack surface. And sometimes the conventional way of doing security testing or runtime protection, they're not fully embedded into the development cycle. So vulnerabilities they slip through, especially when teams are always under pressure to ship fast. Now the third one, which is increasingly critical, is that attackers today don't hack in as much as they log in. Stolen credentials, token abuses, lateral movement, remote work, SaaS sprawl, right? I mean, they become the new perimeter. So in many organizations, that identity hygiene is not caught up with some of the latest advancements. And the last one, which is the most important one, the data, right? Which is ultimately what attackers are after. Data is everywhere now. Cloud storage, SaaS, analytic systems, but visibility into who is accessing what and whether that behavior is anomalous is often very fragmented. So, if I have to zoom out, the biggest exposure is not that it's not one, but it's more that these are all happening in isolation. So, it's the
Right.
lack of that unified visibility across them that's probably one of the biggest problems. So when World Economic Forum calls, say, cybersecurity as a near-term risk for India, I would really say that because India is highly digital and highly dynamic, that dynamism is a great strength, but also expands the attack surface dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
The enterprises that will be resilient are the ones that treat these diverse data sets and security into a single continuous discipline, not separation, which I was talking about. And they invest in real-time detection, automation, and that ability to see things across that becomes critical.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the truly shift we are beginning to see happen in India, and that's encouraging at this point of time.
Right. So, Mr. Narayana, related to this description and the details you have mentioned, I want to ask an additional question to this. Since we currently have the DPDP in place and the government is actually working on it, enterprises, it will get easier for the enterprises to detect and find out the solutions, right? When it comes to cyber issues in the country.
You're right. In theory, yes.
Hmm.
But compliance alone cannot reduce the risk, right? So many organizations are still in that assessment stage at this point in time. See, the question is, are they operational ready? So that's
Hmm.
probably the gap is, right? While I
Hmm.
agree with you that that kind of just having a tick box to more trust-led governance is the future, but I
Hmm.
don't think they are still at that stage where many of these organizations are ready at an
Hmm.
operation. Yeah,
Yeah, maybe because of that, they need a little bit more time to, to say that yes, we are okay with DPDP and you can finalize, you can run out this. We are fine with the acts in place and the rules that we are going to follow.
correct.
Anyway, so we are going to take our next question up. So, as highlighted in the cultural lag, leaves security as the weakest link. What does the cultural lag look like inside the fast growing Indian digital enterprises, and how can leadership realistically address it?
Yeah, it's so if let's probably dissect what is cultural lag, right? So we are really talking about the gap between how fast technology evolves and how fast organizations behavior evolves, which actually
Hmm.
underpins some of your point we discussed previously, right? So
Mm-hmm.
inside fast growing Indian digital enterprises, that lag shows up in many ways. I would say
Hmm.
very human ways, right? Let's
Mm-hmm.
go deep into it. First,
Hmm.
security is still seen as a gatekeeper and not as an enabler. Okay, so
Okay.
you see product and engineering teams are measured on speed, they're measured on feature releases, they're measured on
Mm-hmm.
customer growth or uptime. Security, on the other hand, is still measured on risk avoidance.
Hmm.
So you get that natural tension. Developers want to ship fast, security reviews later, and in that high
Hmm.
growth environment like in India, later sometimes becomes never. Okay, so that's the first part, right? The second is there is often a siloed structure. When
Hmm.
I mean what I mean by that, security teams operate separately from, say, other parts of engineering like DevOps, cloud teams. They use their own tools. They attend
Hmm.
different things. They report through different lens. So
Hmm.
even if everyone is talented, they're not operating as one cohesive risk management engine. So that's the next part. The third
Okay.
is, security is sometimes still treated as a compliance exercise, which was the point
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned about DBTP, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
than a resilience capability. So the focus becomes audits, checklists, certification instead of real-time threat detection and response. So
Hmm.
compliance is definitely necessary, but it's not
Hmm.
the same as being secure, which is the other lens. And finally,
Hmm.
in hyper growth companies, there is I would say an optimism bias, right? A belief
Hmm.
that hey, we are too small to be targeted, or
Hmm.
we'll deal with when we scale. But
Hmm.
attackers really don't wait for that maturity, and we see that time and again. So
Yes.
that goes to the bigger question, right? Which is what you were asking, like what can leadership realistically do? I think the shift has to come from top. Security must be framed as a business enabler and not a cost center. That's point number one. The point number two is integrate security into your core engineering metrics. So by that, it means that if, say, developers are measured on velocity, you will get velocity. But if they are measured on, say, secure deployment and taking time to remediation as well, the culture will slowly adjust. So what get measured gets managed. That could be the next one. The third is, and which is probably one of the reasons, that the reason I wrote that article is collapse those silos. Most resilient organizations we see are adopting, more of this I would call a DevSecOps kind of mindset where you have shared insight, shared visualization, shared incident response process. So in at the end, right? I think we also need to automate everything what is possible because culture change is hard if security feels like a manual friction, right?
Right.
So if guardrails are automated, if policy checks are automated, right, then secure behavior becomes the path of least resistance, which is the important. So ultimately, cultural lag is not about capability. Now, India, as you know, has a world-class engineering talent. So it's about that alignment, is what I would say. So the organizations that can win, the ones where speed and security are not the opposing forces, but the two sides of the same strategy.
Okay, thank you for explaining that to us. Now, I will move to a very important question which is related to the AI. And since India is hosting the India AI Impact Summit this week, so it is a very relevant question, I believe, to ask at this moment. So, as AI adoption accelerates, many organizations are dealing with the shadow AI and loosely governed cloud integration. How can observability help detect these hidden risks before they turn into business critical incidents?
Yeah, we can actually dedicate the whole section on this, but it's a very timely question because
Yeah.
AI adoption right now is moving faster than most of the governance frameworks, designed in many of the organizations, and that's India across the globe, right? So what we are seeing on the ground is that AI is not just being rolled out through formal programs. Okay, it's creeping through some sort of side doors, I would say. Developers experimenting with APIs, business teams signing up on SaaS tools with embedded AI, cloud workloads spinning up some test models. See, that's what people mean by shadow AI, right? In hindsight, the risk is not the AI itself. The risk is lack of visibility, is what I would say. So the big question, which is I think what you wanted to get to, is like how would observability help here? So first, it'll give you that visibility into what actually running on your environment. Now, if like a team is suddenly starts calling an external LLM APIs at scale, or say deploying a GPU back to workload in cloud, it will generate a lot of results. Okay, and observability platforms can detect those unusual patterns in outbound flow, new servers communicating with unknown endpoints, or spikes in resource consumption. Now that was not seen before. Now we know in real world there are so many cases where these crucial steps are missed and there had been issues. Second is observability will help with the data flow tracking, right? One of the biggest shadow AI is the sensitive data being sent to external models without proper control. Again, we have numerous examples where people have shared some information and people have misused that data as well. So when you have fully visibility into that application traces and the flows, right, we can see where the data is going. We can see which services are calling which API and whether that behavior deviates from the policy, right? That could be the another lens. Third is support some of the anomaly detection across different access patterns, because AI tools often require new tokens, or they need accounts or API keys. So if suddenly a service account starts accessing data sets it has never touched before, that becomes a signal, right? So observability allows you to monitor latency, error rates, model drifts, the unusual usage behavior, the cost by you detect degradation before it impacts your broader customer. So so if you think about it, observability is now helping you move from that reactive to proactive zone, especially for AI. So without it, now shadow AI during a data breach investigation or a cost overrun, now we don't have much insights there, right? So, and also we can set some guardrails, for example, alert on unusual API domains, policy violations, a lot of things. So AI is going to, accelerate innovation massively. We know that, especially in fast moving markets like India. So the goal shouldn't be to slow it down. The goal should be to eliminate it, brighten it so that you see what's happening. So because you can't govern what you can't, and in the AI specific zone, I think visibility. I would say visibility is control for AI.
Okay. Yesterday, during this summit, one of the executives really said the same thing as you said, that AI is going to come at a massive pace,
Yeah.
and Indians are not very afraid of adoption of AI. If you
Yeah.
ask any Indian, they are not actually afraid of okay, AI. We can accept it because we have that acceptability gene basically in India.
Correct. Correct.
So yes, I agree with you in this question, this answer. So moving to another question, traditionally security and observability have operated in silos. How is observability reshaping modern cybersecurity by providing end-to-end visibility across infrastructure, applications, and data?
Correct. You're right. Historically, observability was all about uptime, performance, customer experience, and security was all about threats, compliance, and incident response. Different tool, different dashboard, different teams, different views there, right? But as we were discussing, the modern attack surface doesn't respect some of these boundaries which existed in this era. Right? So today, an attack might start with the vulnerable application library that will move laterally through a misconfigured cloud role, escalating privileges via a token, and then end leading to a data extraction. So that entire chain crosses infra, apps, identity, and data layers. So if you're visible fragmented, you are only seeing the part of the story, right? And that's where observability is reshaping that cybersecurity in a way. First, provides that end-to-end telemetry in real time. Now, whether it's logs, whether it's signal, or whether it's user activities, or whether it's network flows, all are correlated fundamentally. So instead of seeing that isolated, different alerts coming from different points, now you're seeing behavior, but with the context. So for example,
Right.
let me give you a simple example, right? Hey, the server has high CPU, for example, but that is not enough for you to know why the CPU spiked. This server spiked CPU right after a new deployment of code triggered by a previously unseen API call from an unusual IP. See, that's a concept, right? And that changes everything. That means now finding the root cause becomes fast, right? Second, observability will enable security to shift left and shift right at the same time. What do I mean by that? Shift left because now even engineering team can detect vulnerabilities, right? Configuration system. Shift right because during any incident, now any team can trace the full blast radius of that attack, which services are impacted, which users are impacted, or what data parts were touched. So that dramatically reduces the time to detect and respond. And that's the most critical metric for any company, right? They should be able to reduce that blast rate. Third
Right.
is, which is what I will keep coming back to, is like it will break that organizational silos which exist today, which is, security and engineering teams are looking at the same platform, right? And most important is, traditional security is often relied on perimeter control or periodic assessments. Now, observability will change that. It will introduce this continuous verification, constantly analyzing behavior across these ecosystems. So, in many ways, observability is not replacing security, it is kind of amplifying it.
Okay. Okay, interesting. Moving to a regulation question once again, as we already discussed the DPTP a little bit. So, boards and the regulations are now pushing for both speed and cyber resilience in the country. How can Indian enterprises balance the rapid innovation with the stronger security without slowing down the digital transformation? Because we don't want to slow down the digital transformation at all and at this juncture. So, what is your take on this?
It's yeah, okay. So that tension, speed versus security, I think it's probably defining some of the challenge right now.
Yeah.
Like you said, boards want digital growth, regulators want resilience, accountability, and auditability, and tech is some kind of stuck in the middle, right? To trying to deliver. So the good news is that speed and security are not opposing forces. In fact,
Okay.
when done properly, that stronger security actually enables faster innovation, right? So if we have to think about Indian enterprises, I would say if we need to balance it, I think they should stop treating security as a checkpoint and start embedding it as a design principle, right? Which is
Okay.
again, going back to the cultural part. If security review happens at the end of, let's say, you build something, that will slow things down. But if you are put the guardrails beforehand, like right from the ideation stage, right, automated code scanning, etc., then the secure deployment itself becomes a default, option there, right? Second is this periodic audit mindset, right? That needs to go into this continuous visibility because, they regulate ask you, can you demonstrate control in real time, not just right? So that again, observability will play a bigger role there. The third is, adopt a risk-based approach and not a fear-based approach. What do I mean by that? Not every system will carry the same level of risk, right? Some customer base, some security essential services, they require deeper control. Some of the financial systems require deeper control, right? In the internal experimentation environment, probably you don't need that kind of, deep, stronger risk appetite. Fourth is, which I think will also play a bigger role, is leadership alignment. That becomes critical because if we are just rewarding speed, new features after release, then the organization will start optimizing around that. But if
Yeah.
the board starts, say, including scorecards, which include, say, cyber resilience metrics, then I think that behavior shifts. Culture will follow that incentive, right? And finally, automation is also a great equalizer because some of those security processes, especially in India, cannot scale at India's digital growth. So
Right.
automation, AI-driven systems, I think they will become another part. So the real rebalance is not about slowing that down, which is I think what you alluded to. It's about engineering transformation to be secure by design, right? So that's
Okay.
how we can deliver speed and resilience, not as a trade-off, but as more of a complementary outcome.
Okay, okay. So my last question for this discussion is this: since Datadog has expanded rapidly in India, and works with digital first companies across several other sectors.
Yeah.
Based on this engagement, what cyber and technology risks should Indian organizations start preparing for over the next 2 to 3 years? And at the time when DPDP Act is in place, and we are actually trying to, we are actually would like to see these companies to comply with the act.
Correct, correct, correct. So that's actually a very forward-looking question, and it's the right one to ask now. I would
Hmm.
say I would group these emerging risks into some of the key themes. Maybe that's a way to look at that. First is AI-driven attack sophistication. Attackers, already are using AI to automate phishing, generate
Hmm.
polymorphic malware, probe
Hmm.
API at scale. There are a lot of things which are happening. So over the
Hmm.
next few years, attacks will become faster, they'll become more adaptive. So it
Hmm.
has to be behavior based and real time. So that's the first part.
Hmm.
Second is AI governance and model risk on the defensive front. What do I mean by that? Is that as organizations are embedding AI into products and operations, they'll face the risk around model drift, prompt injection,
Hmm.
data poisoning, and intended data leakage.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
many companies are experimenting quickly, but governance frameworks are still maturing. So again, the risk won't be about breach; it's about reputational damage and regulatory scrutiny, right? So that AI governance and model risk, uh, you know, uh, is another layer. The third is identity-centric attacks because it is still, the perimeter is not there, so it'll start getting bigger. So organizations that don't mature towards some of those identity centric risk, yeah, that probably is an area to consider. Fourth is, and I think this is very important in my opinion, supply chain and third party risk. Because if you think
Hmm.
about it, Indian enterprises are now deeply integrated into that broader global ecosystem, right? Say software dependencies, cloud
Hmm.
providers, fintech partners,
Hmm.
logistics API, right? So the vulnerability in one partner can actually cascade quickly across, right? So that becomes another area. Fifth is cloud cost and resilience risk. What I mean by that is, as infrastructure is becoming more dynamic, um,
Hmm.
they'll also cause some financial shocks. So a
Hmm.
compromised API, for example, or a runaway AI workload can create both security incident and a massive cost spike. So that convergence of FinOps and SecOps will also need to work closely going forward. Uh, and finally, the regulatory acceleration. I know you mentioned about DP framework, right? Now boards will have to face increasing accountability. So the expectation won't be just, hey, are you compliant? But can you
Hmm.
demonstrate continuous control and rapid response, which is what I highlighted previously. So if I have to summarize this in one line, right, the risk over the next few years is not just more cyber threats, it's that compounded complexity, right?
Okay.
So the next phase of digital growth, resilience won't be just about preventing breaches, but it's
Hmm.
about sustaining that trust, sustaining that stability, and the innovation at that national scale. I think
Hmm.
that's probably the biggest ones I can list.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Narayana, for having this wonderful conversation with us regarding how rapid, during this rapid digital innovation time period, how enterprises can secure themselves and what kind of next steps they should take when we are currently living into the AI driven environment. So, thank you so much for sharing all the details with us. It was a great pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much for having me.